the sentence that starts, I'll be happy when, when I lose the 10 pounds, when I lose the baby weight, when I start, having visible abs, there is no weight in which you automatically turn happy. There is no ab definition that automatically unlocks the happiness box. It's because it's not a destination. It is simply a direction.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Thick Thighs Save Lives podcast. I'm Kelsey.
Hi, Kelsey. I'm Rachel. Welcome back, guys. Thank you for spending another week with two crazy sisters.
You know how we started.
16 water bottles.
I
94
know.
computers.
Oh, but seriously, that's, I don't know if you see any of the comments, but I do from the ladies that are listening to the podcast week to week. And when we said, thanks for joining back with a couple degenerates with a couple opinions, and they were like, this is the best description ever. And I was like, that's when you found your people.
Yeah.
They just are like, yeah, that's it. And I'm here for it.
That feels good. That feels good to just be among other degenerates. Self-described, of course.
It sure is. And we have an exciting episode for you guys today. Well, I'm in general excited for this episode because we're talking about happiness today, which I don't know if everyone feels this way, but it's this because when you ask people what they want out of life, generally it has some sprinkle of happiness in it. They just want to find happiness as if it's this destination and not an evolving feeling that comes and goes. And setting it as a destination is an interesting source of inevitable disappointment. But there is a way in several ways to increase your happiness. And I'm excited to talk about that with you guys today.
Yeah, happiness is a weird topic. When you first, brought this up to me, I kind of was, I'm not on that hippie shit vibe. I don't, I like science-backed things. I like measurable data. I like things that you are able to explain with causation. And
Quantify.
I like that kind of stuff. And when you talk about happiness, some in the past for me, it has been unquantifiable. It has been subjective. It's been like a thing like, how do you measure that? How can you possibly have science-backed data around something that to me wasn't measurable? And doing a deep dive into the top researchers, scientists, psychologists, all the people that are doing the work on happiness right now, I left completely changed that this is not some, hippie shit guru kind of vibe. It's so quantifiable. It's so I just left with such a different feeling on this topic. And I hope that you will too after this podcast, because something, previously that I had thought of as, an out of reach emotion that we're all just chasing is really not that for me anymore. And I'm glad to have this new perspective on happiness.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. I know you were hesitant when I brought up, having a discussion about happiness, but I really felt like it was in my mind overdue, because a lot of what we've talked about in the podcast has been living a happy, healthy life. And that's been the baseline for us starting a fitness podcast, for including mental health, physical health, emotional health, all of the things. And the ultimate goal is to live a happy, healthy life. And we can talk about ways that you can get there, and ways that you can get there with your fitness and feel good in your body, and nutritionally, how can you get there, and spiritually, can you get there, and in your mind, what does a healthy mind look like? How can we get there? But in today's episode, we're really going to talk about happiness in a way of like, how can we measure it? What are some different ways to increase your happiness? And a realistic view of where your baseline is. Because I think that's a really important start. Like, we kind of have this idea that these people are happy, these people are not, and that is how their affect is showing, like how they experience life or how we are interpreting their experience of life. And none of that's really true because you cannot gauge someone else's happiness. And one of the things I found very interesting while I was thinking about this and just researching it was one of the ideas around the different personality types of, how likely, like where your happiness is on a scale of your affect. And one of the things I found the most interesting was comedians and where their humor really comes from and where they fall on kind of a happiness scale. Because initially you would kind of think that they're gearing more towards the like on the happier side. But humor actually comes from generally comes from a more unhappy affect.
The dark
Isn't that
side.
funny? The dark side, because they've used humor to offset the majority of dark thoughts. So I was like, that's interesting, because when we think of happiness and affect, we automatically think about laughter, smiling, that kind of, how we demonstrate happiness. And that was one of the most interesting things for me, because I was like, oh, but not surprising.
Well, there was a lot of surprising things for me when we started getting going on this. And what I would like listeners to leave today's episode with is, we're going to talk about and review some of the findings of the top experts in the world on this topic. And, the science, the studies, happiness, like what are we talking about scientifically, and how and where is this, like, is this anecdotal, like what this information scientifically, what are the top researchers in this field doing and saying? And then I want to leave people with, some misconceptions about happiness, because I think that we have a ton of, well, I don't want to leave you with misconceptions. I want to leave you thinking about the misconceptions, because I think that when we initially define happiness, a lot of times we're wrong. According to the experts, I was wrong. Anyways, and I also want to talk about, how much of your happiness is predetermined. I found that to be really, really interesting. And again, like you said, personality traits. I want people to be able to kind of categorize and see themselves in, get a baseline for their starting point on happiness, and genetically think about how much that's a factor. And I also want to leave you guys with some actionable tips. Social psychologists, top researchers have come up with actionable ways in which you can create or destroy your own happiness. And I want to really have like a deep dive into some things that we can do, because we, like everything, are in so much more control than sometimes we give ourselves credit for.
That's a great point. So thinking about all of that and what the research has shown and who we're going to talk about, I mean, we're not going to discuss happiness without talking about Arthur Brooks, because he is the powerhouse in the space. He wrote a book with Oprah, for Christ's sake.
For Christ's sake.
Oprah Winfrey.
If you have that on your list of accolades, you're done. You've done
I
it.
know.
You've
As
won
soon as
life.
as soon as I found that,
Winfrey.
I was just like, Winfrey. I mean, because she is the top dog, but ultimately, some of these super successful powerhouse people who have hit the epitome of what we would describe as, these are the things that I need initially to gain happiness, successful people. They are searching out how to find happiness because the answers are not in the things that we think that they are, or that traditionally we've thought they are. And so if you're setting goals on it being like a financial thing, it being a fitness thing, like none of those are true. So I'm just going to bust that up right away. But I did want to ask you, Rachel, what did you feel was the most interesting thing that you learned when thinking about or researching this topic about happiness?
For sure, the genetic component blew me away. It blew me away. Um, Obviously, I have always felt that, personality traits are a big part of perceived happiness in a person. How somebody kind of leans, extrovert, introvert, optimist, pessimist. We've named these things over the years, numerous different ways of saying, is somebody sort of predisposed to certain personality traits that display to others as happiness? And are some people not predisposed to those? And I've never, you can see it in people and we recognize it, but I've never considered that there was a genetic component there, and which is ridiculous because, like, if you can see this happening all over, what do you think? This is all by chance? We all just like landed here. And I really found that to be the thing that stopped me in my tracks and just said, and like I wanted more from this. I wanted more research. I wanted more articles. I wanted more papers because that got me thinking about, the different ways in which I have had misconceptions about happiness and what it actually is. What was your most interesting thing you learned?
Oh, this is my worst thing about doing a podcast is like I this is my quick tangent. I listen very intently to responses and I'm like in them and I don't think about what the next question is going to be and how I'm going to respond.
I
So
can
then
give you time. One of
I'm like,
yours
then
at
I
the
get
end.
like all caught off guard. I'm like, hey,
Sorry.
great points. No, you're doing great. I think it's a personality flaw of mine.
We'll come how about at the end? And like I don't
Well,
want you
I
to like
think I have
focus on it all the time, but
no, I think I do have a good one. The predisposition to your happiness and your affect was very interesting to me. I thought that what I found most interesting, and I think this is maybe a personal thing, is the strategies that we have taken based on our predisposition to either enhance our happiness or hurt our happiness. And I think that comes to mind for me because I have developed a lot of strategies throughout my life in order to cope in a mainstream, like society, in a neurotypical world. I've created a lot of strategies, and happiness is one of them that I think a lot of as I like started the research, I noticed a lot of strategies that I have put into place. And this just like is one of those things that keeps coming up for me. I'm like, well, you were focused so hard on trying to fit in a neurotypical world that you focused on strategies so intently that you developed them in several different ways. And I think that is one of my strengths because in another life, I thought it was not a strength. I would have called it like a deficit, that you're like just like working so hard for like masking or to fit in, or, I'm just like working so hard to figure out how everyone's doing the thing that I'm not doing. But at the end of the day, I think it's a strength. And I think that I can identify some of those strategies maybe easier than some neurotypical people who haven't had to focus as hard on them. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It makes sense to me, especially as your sister too. Um, so I
Well,
totally
Rachel's been
get that.
involved in these strategies since day one of, hey, you read that chapter? Uh-huh. What'd it say? No idea. Not a single clue. There was words.
Let's make
I
a
read them out
song.
loud. Like, you were definitely reading, but you were not absorbing.
I mean, I think one of the things that is very unique, obviously, when we're thinking about this topic and we're looking at the genetic component, and then we're using
Yeah.
a similar set of genetics, right? Not the same because we're not identical
Mhm.
twins, but we are sisters. And like seeing some of those similarities and then like looking at other people that I'm not genetically linked to and
Tied
being like,
to.
huh,
Mhm.
huh.
Ha!
So all right. So the first thing I want to talk about is some misconceptions about happiness and how they can actually hurt our happiness
Mhm.
because we just don't understand it. Now, when asked, is happiness a choice? Our favorite, our top expert in this field, Arthur Brooks. He's a Harvard professor. He is just, if you haven't read his book, if you haven't seen his talks, he is amazing.
Incredible,
And
yeah.
just such a top mind in this field that I want people to definitely seek him out if you have interest in this topic. When he was asked, is happiness a choice? His reply, now this is the top expert on happiness, is happiness is unattainable because it's a direction, not a destination. And we talk about this so much when it comes to body image, diet, fitness. We say it in other ways, but the sentence that starts, I'll be happy when,
Mm.
and we often use it on this podcast is, when I lose the 10 pounds, when I lose the baby weight, when I start, having visible abs, because for so many women, it gets sort of caught up in body image and looks and fitness in that way. But we've said it with regards to body image so many times that there is no weight in which you automatically turn happy. There is no ab definition that automatically like unlocks the happiness box. Um, it it's just not, and that was it was explained so much better by him than it's because it's not a destination. It is simply a direction. And thinking of it in that way really changes the way in which you chase it, right? Because if you're looking for happiness and you're setting it as some place that you're going to get to and then live, I don't know what it looks like, clouds and 70 degrees, zero humidity. I don't know what that looks like. It probably looks different for
Rachel went
everyone.
to the weather.
Well,
When you
um,
pictured your happiest destination, you were like,
mine's
it's
more around
70.
80, but I wanted to be like more relatable. I know people would have been like, what did you just say? 80 was pleasurable. Um, but yeah, just thinking of it more as like I turned this way and this is the direction that I'm working towards rather than like sitting in the clouds in 70 degrees is just so much more, I don't know, it's so much more tangible for me.
Well, I think that's why it became really important when we're talking about a direction instead of a destination, and tying that to how we set our goals is a really important thing to think about. Because if we're setting our goals as just the destination and not the direction, we are constantly chasing something we'll never get to. And the diet industry has really built its whole life on this because it's the most successful unsuccessful industry that there is out there. You will never find success in a diet, but it is the most successful industry. So it's based on the fact that we're constantly looking for, and money does the same thing to people. We're constantly looking for this end result of when I get here, I'll be happy. And no matter how many times, no matter how many podcasts, no matter how many experts or discussions we have around the fact that once you get there, you will not feel this way. You will not feel happy if you just set the destination as being what it is, and you'll say that's when I will get happy. It's proven by the top experts that that's not how it's going to go. And you can see the people with the most money and realize that they have not achieved happiness. You can see the people with the most fitness and say they have not achieved happiness. And because it is not something that you achieve and sustain long term. And that, I think, is where one of the other biggest lies come into, is once you reach there, once you feel happiness, like you have these moments in your life, right, where you sit there and you go like, I feel genuinely happy. I hope you guys all have those. And you realize that that's not going to be there forever. That will happen. And when it happens, it's really lovely, and you can sit there and you can just be like, I feel genuinely happy right now. However, it's not sustainable. So if we think about it as a destination that is not sustainable, we realize that it's not this thing that once we get there, we've unlocked it, we've got it forever. You can increase your happiness, and you can increase the number of times, you can increase your mood, you can increase your general affect and your outlook into this world. But you cannot get to a place where you say, I am just happy all the time. Like it's not there.
I I I also found, his answer, Arthur Brooks. I found his answer to is being happier a choice. I found this to be because following, saying like happiness is unattainable. I was like, oh God, it is.
Okay, yeah, follow it up with
um,
something.
is is it a choice? He said yes, absolutely. So it's not attainable, but it's a choice.
Mm.
Is I love that. I love that. Like
That
type
makes
A
me
is
feel
like
energized. Yeah.
show me a challenge. But yeah, I think, of all the studies that we looked at leading up to this episode, and like, it doesn't matter what field it is. It's fitness, nutrition, it's financial. I remember looking at one where they took happiness ratings from people who had won the lottery against people who had not, and they didn't look any different. It's proven over and over, but we still keep chasing these tangible things and saying like that's what will equate to it. But I think that making sure that we categorize happiness correctly is like really important, because we've been told, that it's a feeling, it's like an emotion. But the problem with emotions is there's like a million that come in a day. Right? So like if you categorize happiness as a feeling, and then you feel it, and then an hour later you also feel sadness, it's like, well, am I happy? I don't know. I was, and then I lost it. And then it becomes this thing that's like a weird, I'm going to block out all sadness. I'm going to
Mm.
block out anger. I'm going to block out depression. If I feel those things, that means I'm not happy. And I just want to point out that that's a huge misconception, that true happiness is not the absence of anger or sadness or depression or anxiety. That's not what it is, okay? It is not possible to eliminate those emotions. And if you do, you're going to be in a very dangerous situation. If you try to eliminate anger, anxiety, sadness from your everyday life, you are putting yourself in a huge state of danger, because without negative emotions, there is no human experience. There is no growth. There's nothing. You're dead, right? You're dead without negative emotions, because you can't even process um, any growth in yourself?
Well, I think that's one of the most important things sometimes that we talk about, because everyone wants some of these. We categorize some of our positive emotions or part of it positive experiences without any of the negative ones. And success is the same thing. Success doesn't come without struggle. So it's like courage doesn't come without fear. The counterbalance to everything that we are feeling or experiencing, we'd like to skip over that. And that is particularly prevalent when it comes to health and fitness, because
Yeah.
we'd like to skip over the struggle or the journey part. We'd like to just get to the six pack, right? And that's an interesting idea, because it's not even just get to the six pack, but get to a feeling of comfort and confidence in our body. I think that's actually what I was looking for more, is like, we want to get to that confident feeling, but we want to skip over all the steps to develop the confidence. And we want to skip over the uncomfortable actions that increase confidence. And we've talked about this in a whole episode, but some of the uncomfortable things of like taking off your shirt at the gym, or wearing the shorts that you want to wear, wearing a crop top, wearing the things that generally bring you joy without putting so much emphasis on what you look like or what other people think, is the baby steps to developing confidence that does not require validation from other people. But we don't, those things are really hard. And I'm not saying they're not hard, and I'm not saying they're particularly hard for wherever your baseline is, because wherever our baseline is for anything that we start is going to impact our ability to do the thing, or our willingness to do the thing, or what our steps will look like to do the thing. But the answers are still the same.
It's still the same.
Right? Like you have to do the uncomfortable thing. If you want confidence, you're going to have to start to diminish your reliance on other people's opinions.
I think
Not get a smaller waist.
It's another good misconception, to discuss that happiness is comfort. That isn't it either. Mm-hmm. That isn't either. I just think so much of what we equate to happiness also is associated with comfort. Feeling good in my body means I'm comfortable, and I don't have sources of anxiety or discomfort about the way that I feel about my body. Financially, having more money means I will be comfortable, and I won't have the discomfort of financial burdens, or not being able to have the things that I want. And equating happiness to comfort is a very, very dangerous thing. I will implore you. See what it is? I have to implore you to disassociate those two things, because every single study worth anything has shown that happiness must, not like it must come along with feelings of discomfort. And that is just the hard truth that we all have to sit with, is that the human experience and truly feeling happy is a result of many, many circumstances of discomfort.
Mm-hmm. That's a really great point.
It's love season.
We're interrupting this podcast to tell you about the season of love.
Oh my God, I love love. Don't you love love?
No.
Oh.
I'm just kidding, I do.
Yeah, okay. You can't really go back on that statement. It was like you already went too far down that road. You don't love love, but we have our Valentine's collection dropping, and it's for the lovers of love and the anti-lovers of love, because we got that Avril pattern, which I feel is anti-love.
Listen, you can go in either directions. You could go self-love, love with a mate, love with a partner, whatever you want to do, but it already dropped this past Friday and is available for purchase right now. And if you haven't checked out any of our shirts, we got some pretty sassy ones for Valentine's Day. We always do it really nice. So pick up all of your goods for this upcoming February, and just plan it. Get hot.
So let's get into if it's easier or harder for some people naturally to be happy? Because this was my favorite part of the research, and I'm really excited to share it because I think some people have a view that there are generally happier people and they don't know how they got that way and they're jelly of them. And there are people that have to work harder for it. And if you've ever had this view, I want to just validate you right now because that's true. I didn't know that.
Yep. Yeah,
I didn't know that.
definitely. We also are going to give you kind of the different personality breakdowns. Like you can take this test. So we've talked about the Enneagram before, which is a different personality test. And this is one specifically developed by Arthur Brooks, which you can take for free and kind of see where you fall along these lines or where you are right now. This isn't necessarily where you are genetically predisposed, but what you are, where your current scale is to kind of branch out into these different personality types. So the questionnaire is called the PANAS questionnaire, and it's the positive and negative affect schedule. So it refers to the emotions and feelings you might experience or display in terms of like your emotional influence and how you make decisions based on that. So a lot of people can identify with that because people who have just a general positive affect to them tend to make decisions. Therefore, they make decisions that feed their positive affect. Now, it's not one or the other. There's a lot of nuances to this, but I wanted to kind of say the 4 personality profiles and maybe see if you guys hear yourselves in one of these profiles so that we can kind of just talk about it and see where you fall. And what I really want to hammer in is that none of them are good or bad. When you hear like positive and negative affect, we naturally positive and negative, good, bad. But that's not true. It really isn't. It's just where you kind of fall, and the world needs literally all of these types. But the first one that I wanted to go over is the cheerleader. So the cheerleader is you tend to express a lot of positive affect and express little to negative or little negative affect. So these people have a lot of good moods, very little bad moods, or have very few bad moods, and that's just their general affect. Do you think that's you, Rachel?
No.
No. I'll say them all, and then you can say, like,
No, I know which one I am. I know which one I am.
Cool.
But we can just go ahead and say that's you.
No, that's not where I landed.
You didn't land in cheerleader?
No.
Really?
Which I thought you would have known, but let me get through all of them.
Oh.
The poet
Okay.
is the next one. And they tend to show high negative affect and low positive affect. So these are people who are a little more on the like pessimistic side. They have a lot of bad moods, fewer good moods. And this is where the poets, they tend to be very creative. And these are, where some of the comedians fall in. Now, this is where some people are making these wrong assumptions, is because how they're reading other people, they've decided that this is how you might fall into any of these scales, which is just not true. Because I thought, even though comedians do have a lot of dark humor, and I don't know, I just was like, you just love to laugh. But those are the poets. So high negative and low positive affect. Mad scientist is the next one. You're high on both ends. So you have strong emotions, both good and bad. And the last one is the judge. And these are people who are low on both. They have low positive affect and low negative affect. So they don't experience really strong moods on either side. Like people you would think about this would be judges, but also surgeons. Like they're very even keeled. You don't get a lot from them on either direction. And some of these, like as you go through these, you can realize that you need all of these in the world, right? Like you don't want someone who is in a crisis to be experiencing super high highs or super low lows. Like you want someone who's pretty even keeled. They're not all overly happy. They're not overly sad, but they're just like rolling in on the situation. So where did you fall?
I just wanted to also point out, because a lot of people that fall into the poet
Yeah.
feel some type of way about that they have more negative affect than positive, and that must be some sort of personality flaw. And I just wanted to point out, just as Kelsey said, in the crisis, you need the judge. The the amount of art and like poetry and the things that have been created by the people who identify in that realm, their mark on the world is so remarkable. And I just don't want to, I don't want writers, the people that are producing the things that we are taking in and feeling such immense emotion
Strong.
from, like
Yeah.
that are deriving such strong emotions from us, probably created by the poet. So I just don't want to, negative bucket those people. It's
If you
hard.
fall in that category too, it's not that you cannot experience happiness or that
Oh God,
you
no.
can increase your happiness. That's not it at all. Those people have a tendency to go towards a negative affect, but at the same time, they tend to be very cautious, and they can see danger coming also really well, because and you need those people, right? Like we've talked about this, and it, like, I think it was one of the studies when we talked about like a tribe of monkeys, and like the monkeys were like the ones that were always like looking out and just like being very cautious, because they had this predisposition that something was going to happen that they needed to look out for. The cheerleaders weren't looking out for it, right? But the poets are keeping the cheerleaders safe. you know?
So, and I do just want to also point out about these, these types, is that these are, your emotional tendencies. And really, emotions are a big part of what goes into making our decisions and the direction of our life. But also, I just want to point out that emotions are really just our way of the brain to process what's going on around us in a translatable way. So they aren't fixed, is all I'm just trying to point out, is that emotions are coming and going. It's like the waves in the ocean. And it's really not, we don't have to ever be tied to one, because they're really just our way of seeing the world in a way that makes sense to our brain. That's all. This is good. This is
hmm
bad. Run, don't
Yeah.
run. Like
Yeah.
that's all they are. And so I just don't want, people to get too tied up in, who they are. I was mad scientist.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's surprising. I
Did you
would have
think I was
gone.
judge?
I thought you were a judge.
Yeah.
I was also a mad scientist, but I
Yeah.
thought you would have gathered that because Rachel's made jokes about like the fact that like I can switch and become like my I experience motions at all emotions at a very high frequency. Um all of them.
All of them.
And all of them. So see, that's why I thought you had that under control, but that obviously comes with a lot of strengths and deficiencies. And I wanted to talk about some of the ways that you can take your kind of like personality profile, and you guys can take this online. I think we can link it in the show notes. But so to see where your personality profile comes in, which is a range, of course, this just gives you a baseline, but where you can kind of work to fill some holes is knowing where you start. And this is the beautiful thing about life, because I used to have a lot more range in my emotions than I do now, where I found more of an even keel. And that's where I've talked about at the beginning of the podcast the strategies that have come into place, because I know one of the things that I have I've identified in my life is the extremes in how my personality goes and how my moods can go. And limiting or working to limit bring the floor up a little bit on some of the lows. And I think that's something that subconsciously I've been working on for many years. And the beautiful thing about getting older and learning more about yourself is that you can develop some of these strategies and have it work in your favor. And fitness comes into play. They specifically talked about, how fitness can contribute to your happiness. And I air bunnied that because when the question was posed, does fitness make you happier? The answer was no. Fitness lowers your unhappiness. And that was very interesting to me once I learned my personality profile, because that's exactly how I've used fitness. It has limited my unhappiness and essentially moved me in more on the other side. But I really just lowered the extreme that I'm going into when it becomes unhappiness, because fitness is the best way to manage a negative affect. That's been said in his book. Fitness is the best way to manage a negative affect. So I've identified having a negative, or the parts of my personality that have an extreme negative affect, and have put pieces into place to manage it.
I mean, is that really all we can do? Because if we accept that a certain percentage of this is genetic, it's a range, right? Then what we can do with that is say, okay, first I have to know myself. That's the most important thing, is I have to be honest and know myself where I'm falling in this genetically, in this range. And then work with what I got.
And work
Right?
with what I got.
Like, work with what I got. Because that's what we all have to do. It's like we say this in fitness all the time is, there are things genetically predisposed that you are going to show more in fitness and show less. And we're all working with like a preset hand. But that doesn't mean that anything's ever out of reach. It just means it might be a little more difficult
Well,
for
that's what I
us.
would love to say to people who might have identified themselves like working in a little bit of a more negative affect, is like, what are some of the things that you can do to increase your happiness and limit more of your negative affect? Because if you know where you're working from, then you can put pieces in place to fill the holes, to feel the things that you need. And I think the problem with some of the preconceived notions of this is that, well, if I have a negative affect, I'm just going to seek out a bunch of pleasurable experiences. And as we'll talk about a little bit, is that pleasure does not equal happiness. And if you are continuously seeking out pleasurable experiences without including lasting happiness, I'm going to tell you how to do that because it's very interesting. Then it becomes more of an addiction, right? You're just going towards those hits of dopamine where you're just looking for hits of pleasurable experiences without lasting happiness. And I think anyone can look around and think about times that they've done that in their life, or people that continuously do that. They go for those strong hits of dopamine and then they have that major fallout. I mean, immediately alcohol comes to mind, where people seek out pleasurable experiences from alcohol and have a major drop off, and ultimately doesn't lead them to lasting happiness. And I'm not saying drinking or consuming alcohol is not included in, your happiness. That's it. On the contrary, alcohol can be a source of happiness for you if you decide that is in your life. But where the differentiator is there is including people, essentially, experiences that will enhance lasting happiness, and not drinking by yourself.
So, the thing about the dopamine hits and the pleasurable experience and equating that to happiness is like I said, it's a dangerous game when you
Yeah.
don't truly understand what happiness is and that reads as happiness to you. It's a dangerous game. We know that there are people that are predisposed personality types that seek out addictive behaviors. And, what anybody who knows a drug addict knows this about them.
Well, that's why when you first kind of hear some of these personality profiles, you say like, "Oh, damn, I wish I was the cheerleader, just all positive emotions." Like, not necessarily. Those people have a tendency to seek out pleasurable experiences. Anything without moderation is essentially a fault, right? Those people tend to seek out pleasurable experiences more without the consequences of would come from a negative emotion, because they're constantly avoiding some of the negative emotions, right? So like, you're constantly looking for those dopamine hits without a balance can be the same as, a poet constantly looking to feed, their negative personality profile.
It's one of the biggest takeaways from me about studying happiness is how circumstantial I previously believed it to be. There are things that happen and the things going on outside of,
Mm.
yourself contribute to your happiness or they take away from your happiness. And a lot of them are circumstantial, a lot of them are out of your control. And, the studies that we looked at, like one of the ones that blew me away was the one of identical twins. And
Mm.
they had been separated at birth and they had not been raised in the same environments. This was not done on purpose. This was like already going, and then had come back to these people to study them because of these circumstances. Now we know identical twins have that identical set of genetics, and their happiness profiles, despite never having met each other or being raised in completely different circumstances, were extremely similar. Same thing with the behavior and temperament found, in siblings. 35 to 57% of their behavior and temperament could be explained by genetic variances. It doesn't surprise me that you and I are both in the same profile, even though we display it extremely differently. No one
Yeah.
would think, even I didn't think we were in the same one. You didn't either. You thought I was a judge. I thought you were a cheerleader.
Mm.
It's not that surprising when, after I've done all this research, that the two of us would fall in the same category and display it in different ways, because it's so little about circumstances and so much about what is already going on in your own body and your own genetics. And it just means that, like, this perceived happiness that we have from the things going on around us, it kind of feels good because we can get rid of that. And we can say, like, I'm not a circumstance of happiness. It's not all by chance that maybe I'll be happy and maybe I won't. That not only, does your genetics play a huge role in it, but also that knowing where you fall in this gives you the tools to be able to say, these are the things that I'm going to put in place to maximize it for me. And for some people, it's going to be really hard to develop your glutes. And for some people, it's going to be more difficult to develop happiness. And this is just a fact of life. But knowing that you're quad dominant is the first step, I think, in working on that. So let's go into some actionable tips for all this. This works for all the profile types. It doesn't matter where you fall. All of these actionable tips are going to serve you in ways that is going to promote more happiness, no matter where you're starting from.
Yeah. So, when thinking about what Arthur Brooks tells us is that the micronutrients of happiness and what makes up essentially happiness. And those tend to fall into three categories: enjoyment, satisfaction, and meaning. And where that comes into actionable tips is we have to understand what we're talking about when we're talking about enjoyment, and enjoyment being different than pleasure, which we hit on, because pleasure is the part of the brain that says this feels really good, do it again. And you can see where that would lead to some repetitive or addictive behavior.
It can be a liar.
And it can be a liar
Mhm.
because
It did feel good,
dope
but maybe don't
yes.
do it again.
Yes, exactly.
Mhm.
Because like dopamine release can give you pleasure, but it doesn't lead to long lasting enjoyment. And when we're talking about enjoyment, we're talking about how do we get dopamine hits? How do we get the pleasure to come into the frontal cortex, into long lasting enjoyment? And that's mixing social relationships and creating memories. So that's how they become an enduring part of your happiness profile, is when you have enjoyment. And I wanted to specifically dive into this because in our current world where there's a lot of social media and we get a lot of different dopamine hits. So I don't want to talk about addiction and just like what you are physically consuming. I want to talk about addiction and what you feel you are getting dopamine hits repeatedly on a daily basis. And for a lot of people that involves social media. And are you experiencing enjoyment or pleasure from social media? And I think that's something that individually we all have to ask ourselves. Are you, this is something I asked someone recently when they were at an enjoyable experience and they were doing a lot of capturing it. And there's space for that because like we can find lasting enjoyment by looking back at some pictures or looking back at some videos, things like that. But are you missing where we're actually moving that enjoy, where that pleasurable experience into the frontal cortex by creating that long lasting experience in the moment where you're actually enjoying the people that are in front of you because you're happy to be there with them, or you're enjoying the music that you're sitting there. Like I was recently at a concert with a friend and he was like, later he's like, I just really love how like we looked around and everyone had their phones out, they're recording the singer, and neither of us recorded a single thing from the whole concert. We had so much fun. um And part of that was we were just like in it. We were just feeling it. We were just like in the music and not thinking about how we could put this on social media for other people to enjoy it. It was just like ours. And I think a lot of our society right now is struggling with what enjoyment and fulfillment looks like from pleasurable experiences.
Yeah, it's a weird thing because your brain tricks you. It sends that dopamine hit. You feel the
Yeah.
pleasure and it feels very similar to being happy,
Yeah.
right? And I guess the only difference is the amount of time it lasts. And we know this about like likes on social media. And I think that that's
Mm.
a lot of what drives the behavior that you're talking about, of the sort of future telling of I'm going to share this and it's going to get a lot of likes. And we know what like checking back for likes and increase in likes or not enough likes does to the brain. Dopamine hits are, you know, super they're super addictive, and likes promotes that. And when people are in an experience and they're future telling that this might get them the likes that they want or the attention that they want on socials, it can be confused for happiness.
Yeah. Well, there's a balance there because I understand. I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm here for it. I'm like, take those pictures, do the thing. Like, I'm here for it, but just make sure that you're not missing the experiences that make it enduring, long lasting happiness in your brain. And like the Thanksgiving is another one we can like kind of think about this in the same way, is that like a lot of people have, some guilt or like whatever they're eating around Thanksgiving, but the fact that overall it's a pleasurable experience is generally because people are there. It's because your family is there. And the more and more we get into like being on our phones or being in social media, we're talking to everyone who isn't there. And that's weird. That's a weird thing because like sometimes I'm like, if I wasn't here and you would be talking to me on the phone, right? Like you'd be texting me. So who else now that I am here is more important? Like,
It's the building of the relationships part of,
yeah.
this mixture that has been shown to create lasting happiness. These nutrients, right, that
Yeah.
we're trying to add to the recipe. Social relationships is such a massive part of it. And
Yeah.
what we know about social relationships, according to science on the brain, is that they are strongest in person.
Yep.
And that is what it is. Social media, phones, all of it is great for enhancing secondary communication and relationships among people, but the strongest feelings of connection are in person. And the more that we miss out on those to promote those secondary relationships, or the secondary like form of communicating in a relationship, the less we have of the first one. It just needs to be mentioned.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It just needs to be mentioned in a balanced kind of way,
No.
because
Yeah.
friendships and relationships are a massive, massive part of happiness and even like longevity in your life.
Yep.
The second thing we want to hit on is satisfaction. And this is why it's very dangerous to try to skip the struggle. We've said this a million times, is that if you skip the struggle, the joy afterward isn't there. It doesn't feel the same. It When you do a difficult thing and you overcome it, that feeling of satisfaction is so
A pillar to
genuine.
happiness.
It's a literal pillar. And it's not going to last forever. And that is a very integral part of understanding goal setting and happiness, is that your brain is automatically going to want to just go back to the hunt. That's what it's designed to do. It's not designed to linger on any one satisfactory experience and just like sit in that forever. Well, we're done. Arthur Brooks should have just been done after he wrote a book with Oprah, but he wasn't, because that's not what the brain is hardwired to do. And it's also not going to lead to lasting happiness. It's about, the things you have divided by the things you want.
Yeah, so that simple equation is kind of the solution to satisfaction, because we know satisfaction is the one of the pillars here, and you don't have that without struggle, which is kind of what we're trying to avoid. But if your brain automatically goes back on the hunt, you're kind of like, okay, well, how do I get to the part of satisfaction? Because I know a lot of people who do they do like embrace the struggle, right? They get the struggle and then they get like maybe a glimpse of satisfaction, but they're immediately back on the hunt. And I think there's people in both ways, where like they're avoiding the struggle. There's whatever camp you fall in, where you're like, well, I constantly avoid the struggle so I don't get the satisfaction, or I move too quickly back on the hunt so I don't get the satisfaction. Neither one's better than the other, by the way. But
No.
I do want to say that the solution to this is the math equation of the things, taking inventory of the things that you have divided by the things that you want. And this has to be very purposeful, I think, for everyone, especially for the people who go back on the hunt. Because if you don't be purposeful about taking in the things that you have and the feelings of gratitude and satisfaction that you got from achieving them before you go back on the hunt, you won't get the satisfaction, and ultimately you're not working towards your happiness, because you have to have the satisfaction. It's one of the pillars in order to get the happiness. So in order to achieve, a higher level of happiness. So I think
Because
that
it's
when
not a
we
destination.
because it's not a destination. But I
Mm-hmm.
think that when
Can't
people
get it.
hear that satisfaction part, they're like, okay, well, I don't get the satisfaction because I don't I don't challenge myself on a daily basis to participate in struggle. And I don't, I don't put hard things in front of me because I'm constantly seeking comfort. And then I feel shame and guilt for seeking that comfort, because ultimately it's leading to my unhappiness. And that's where we go for, the things that don't make us feel good, but we want to eat them. And that's where delayed gratification comes into play. Like how delayed gratification can lead to happiness, and practicing delayed gratification, because that is so important for any of the things that we're talking about, because you don't get satisfaction without delaying the gratification. Right? Like, you have to work through it. You have to get into the struggle. So whether you fall into any of those camps, I think it's important to realize, if you fall into camp one and you say, like, I need to seek out struggle a little bit more because I need to find the satisfaction. Identify what some of those struggle things are. Does that mean doing something hard physically every day? Does that mean challenging yourself to delay some gratification for XYZ? Does that mean challenging yourself in relationships to do, whatever it is that you've decided? We're going to get to some specifics with those, because it really is very specific to you and your value system. But that leads us into the third one, which is meaning or purpose. And
So I just want to say about meaning or purpose that in my opinion, this is one of those pillars that we in modern society that we've maybe lost sight of a lot. I think that so much of our lives are surrounded right now around the daily struggles, that the overall meaning or purpose, just backing up and seeing, what are we here to do? What do we want to leave? The thing, like, sometimes, those are big and they're deep questions, and like, they're not things that maybe you want to address on a daily basis. But the happiest people know the answers to those questions in a second.
Well, I think what's contributed to this has been an ever-evolving society where we don't have a lot of time to sit and think, because productivity has been the more. We do more, we have less downtime. When we do have downtime, we fill it with looking at our phones. We don't ever sit in silence with people. We don't ever sit in silence with ourselves. And in order to think about meaning and purpose, it has to intrinsically come from you. Like, it cannot come from
No
an
one can
outside
tell
source.
you. Yeah.
So we're searching for things. And when it comes to the idea of searching for your purpose, or searching for your meaning, even putting searching in front of it has people confused, because once they think about searching for something, they're going to Google it.
Like, Google it?
Like, what's my meaning?
What is my purpose?
Like, I feel like a lot of people can, that resonates with them. And so I wanted to think about, if you've decided, like, I don't know what my meaning or purpose is, but like, there are two main questions that come with this. And if you don't have an immediate answer to that, I just want to say that that's okay, because these are hard questions. But the first one is, why are you alive? And the second one is, what are you willing to die for? And those are deep, man. Like, why are you alive? I don't know. We don't generally just go through life like asking ourselves, like, why am I alive? And coming up with meaning behind that, because it's not something that you can search. It's not something that someone else can tell you. And when people are looking for some type of meaning or some type of purpose, it's all over the place, right? They go to psychics, they go to psychologists, they go anywhere but themselves. They go to the Dalai Lama, which is a good place to start. But they're looking for it in lots of
He
places
knows.
aside from themselves. He knows. And what are you willing to die for is one of those things that if initially when I said that, you said, I'm not willing, nothing, like nothing, no person, nothing comes to my mind. Or if you are someone who, when I posed that question, you had a flutter of things or people that came to the front of your mind. You said, like, I'm willing to die for Rory. I'm willing to die for, you had a bunch of people that came or a bunch of things that came to your mind. You see where your value system goes and what is the most important thing to you. And I guarantee most people, money didn't come to the forefront. Maybe some, but
Maybe
what are you
some,
gonna do
and
with
that's
it?
okay. That's
And that's
I
okay.
mean, well, listen. If you ask that question and you answer it honestly, it tells you so much about yourself,
Yeah.
about what you need to be seeking more of in order to fulfill your purpose. So, yeah, I don't think probably money came up for most people. I think, but still, it should be in the conversation that understanding your intrinsic purpose is not a judgmental
Mm.
practice.
Hmm. Well, it matters because you're asking yourself, like, why are you here? Which is a very important thing that many of us need to figure out and answer. And if you okay, so do you want to say anything to those questions or no?
I do not want to say anything to those questions, but you already said all my answers. So.
I'm just throwing them out there. But I think that for some people, if things came to your mind and you said, like, I would like to think more about that, but some of these things came to my mind. Or if you are someone who heard those questions and you say, I don't have anything that I would die for and I don't know why I'm here. So what now? I want to say, and this might be just like part of my personality, is that's a really exciting place to be because what a start to an adventure. Like that is the start to your adventure because you've asked these questions and you don't have some answers to them, but you have an exciting opportunity to figure out what the answers might be. I don't know. Sometimes we get really hard on ourselves when we don't have the answers to something, but that's a really exciting part of life and growth and a journey. So, what a cool place to be to start your adventure. And we have some questions posed to kind of figure out what the answer is to those questions. Like, not even necessarily the answer is, but what are the actionable steps you can do to find out what your answer is?
It
First
is
one.
very
Go ahead.
exciting. I just
I
wanted to
find,
agree with you.
yeah, I find, the start of that adventure to be very exciting because you have so much in front of you to figure out and to kind of sift through that. That's an exciting time to be alive. So the first way to start is to identify what you think is right or wrong. And this is looking at your value system, it's looking at your moral principles and deciding what those are. And that can be you can start super basic. This really is not a judgmental practice of what you think is right and wrong. And you can write some things down and and some steps to live in accordance to that. And this can be very challenging for some people. For example, if you think that betraying your partner is wrong, but you're cheating on them, you're not living your life in accordance to your value system. So some things need to change, right?
Or
So
you need to accept that that's not going to lead to happiness because these are
yes.
just formula. This is just a formula to achieve lasting happiness. And so, like, if you have discrepancies in your moral principles and the way that you're actually living your life, and then you're not happy, that's not a confusing thing. It shouldn't
No,
be.
but it's not. But see where that can kind of like intertwine, where like someone could be seeking a pleasurable experience that is not
Yes.
leading to lasting happiness
Right.
because it does not align with their value system. And that's where, I don't know, I find excitement in that because you can kind of see where the disconnect is, in a way of like, you are seeking a pleasurable experience, but it doesn't align with your value system and ultimately will never lead to happiness. Done. Like,
Done. I mean, delayed gratification is literally just keeps coming back up. Do you want the thing right now for the initial hit of dopamine and pleasure, or do you want to delay that in order to live by a value system in which leads ultimately to you being satisfied with your purpose
yeah.
on.
Or like, I value health, right? Do I live in accordance to that? What does that look like? What are some of the actionable steps that I could take to live in accordance to that? And like, I just want to go back to the fact that this isn't a body type, pounds, like blah 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 blah. Like, no, is health really high on my value system? And what does my life look like, and how can I live in accordance to that?
I really like that actionable step. I think that it's going to help you a ton. I think meditation and mindfulness, we did a whole entire episode on that and how that can lead to clarity about your purpose, about what drives you, about what you want to do here. I think that ultimately sitting with yourself in a state in which you allow thoughts to ebb and flow,
Yeah.
and constant reminders of not living in the future or past, but simply in where you are. It really helps to ground you to understand why you're here, what you're doing, and what you want to do. And lastly, the gratitude. We just did an episode on gratitude because it's so integral when it comes to happiness. The two are so closely linked, and finding in some of the people who have found happiness and rank their life satisfaction very high. There's no commonalities in like money or some of the common things that
Fitness,
you might
status,
think there
fame.
are, right? Status, fame, all those things. But there are commonalities in the categories that we just named, in the categories of purpose, in mindfulness, in gratitude. That's where the overlap can be seen. And that's how, we're coming up with these strategies of, finding this lasting happiness, as if it's like a lucky charm, like at the end of the
Well, contributing
rainbow.
to lasting happiness, or finding more happiness in your life, that this is not something that is just out there and you don't have it, or it's not just something that you're necessarily born with or not born with. There are like some predispositions to how you will display some happiness, or how you'll feel happiness, but ultimately it's going to be within you. It's going to be within your control. And to increase the level of happiness is absolutely within your control. You have the ability to do it, but there are some of these steps, just to kind of reiterate what does that look like, is that you need to find your moral principles. You need to find stillness, and that doesn't necessarily need to be like active meditation. It doesn't need to be, it can be just, I'm sitting with my phone in the car and I'm going to put it down for 5 minutes and look out the window. Just think, just let it be stillness. We're not like taking constantly things in. And sources of gratitude, practice, putting those three things into practice is going to increase the level of happiness that you experience in your life.
no matter where your baseline is starting.
Yeah.
So, we hope you've enjoyed this conversation on happiness. If you are looking for more sources and more research on this, we'll put all of our stuff in the show notes that we used to develop this episode. And we would love to hear from you on what you thought about it. So, get in our app and let us know. We love you.